Hazefire Studios presents The Happiest, Saddest People by J.L. Gerhardt. This is Volume 1, Because He Was Here.
Chapter 2, Inseparable. It's Christmas Eve, 1988, and I'm once again putting on pantyhose. I ripped the pair I wore last night. Beauty is fragile. Plus, I'm 8 and climb trees. Bobby and I ride with Mom and Dad to the funeral. Mom gathers with her brothers and her dad. I sit toward the front. My uncles lead the congregation and Mamaw's selected hymns. I cry, we all cry, when we sing Love Lifted Me. It was her very favorite. After the official service, we walk to the mausoleum, and they put the coffin into a hole in a big marble wall. It's like tucking a bracelet into a velvet-lined jewelry box drawer. And also, it's nothing like that. My 4-year-old cousin screams, "Don't put Mamaw in that hole!" After the funeral, a meal, and after the meal, we drive to my grandfather's house to open Christmas presents. Stockings are hung above the fireplace, one for each child's spouse, and each grandchild. The Christmas tree lights glow, red, green, blue. Mamaw loved her Christmas tree. Martins always celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve. And because stubbornness is the family inheritance, we will not be deterred. Pass the presents, pass the tissues. The year Bobby died, Christmas time, 2002, I listened to Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree on my way to the viewing. We opened his presents for him on Christmas Eve. I was angry he hadn't showed. He would have loved the basketball shorts I bought him. 4 years after Bobby died, I lived in New York and miscarried my first baby in a taxi cab passing by the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. 15 years after that, my family said goodbye to the church we'd loved and served for a decade at the annual Christmas worship service, a service I planned. Christmas is about God's arrival, and Christmas is the setting for all my goodbyes. Christmas and I. It's complicated. I grew up in a church that didn't celebrate Christmas as a religious holiday. I wasn't just an attender at this church, 2 Sundays a month, the occasional potluck. I was the preacher's granddaughter. Before my grandfather preached here, my great-uncle did, and before that, my grandfather was an elder. My great-grandmother sat on the second row, stage right, singing alto. I sat on the second row, stage left, next to my parents, singing alto. Sometimes I sat on the front row, next to the preacher. This church wasn't somewhere I went. It was who I was. So, we didn't celebrate Christmas. My church didn't, and I didn't. We could totally embrace it as a secular holiday. Santa, reindeer, cookies, Christmas lights, the works. But the birth of Jesus? No. Meaning, number 1, we didn't sing Christmas carols in church in December, but we did sometimes in June or July. And number 2, we didn't mention Jesus' birth in sermons or scripture readings, unless it was to say, and as we all know, the Bible doesn't say when Jesus was born. Or, and as we all know, the Bible does not command us to celebrate the birth of Jesus. When my brother and I sang God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen in the car when it came on the radio, we changed the lyrics from God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, let nothing you dismay, remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day, to remember Christ our Savior wasn't born on Christmas Day. Every time we did it, we felt like Martin Luther must have felt nailing his 95 Theses to that door. Except our church also taught that Martin Luther was probably in hell. Sometimes, my family would get Christmas cards from well-meaning friends with nativity scenes or angels on the front. Holding a card like that in your hands was basically like holding a dirty magazine, contraband snuck in from a fallen world. We prayed these card senders would come to their senses. They weren't far from the kingdom of God. Or maybe they were. This is weird. I know it's weird because I've since made friends with Baptists and Christian church people and Presbyterians and Anglicans and non-denoms, and when I explain Church of Christ Christmas posture, they all look at me like I'm insane. I didn't know it was weird then. It was my world. If it wasn't explicitly laid out as a command in the pages of the New Testament, my church didn't do it. And as the Apostle Paul does not appear to have celebrated Christmas, we were definitely not celebrating Christmas. It's worth saying we didn't think God was less with you at Christmas than at other times of the year. Just not extra with you. Christmas wasn't a time to feel super seen and loved, just the same amount of seen and loved as always. God is always equally with you, every day in the same measure, which is pretty with you, but not as with you as, say, the Pentecostals think he is, because God's withness isn't something you feel in your heart, or see with your eyes, or hear with your ears. It's something you know in your head. Emmanuel looks like a long-distance phone call with loving silence on one end. Emmanuel looks like words on a page, loving letters written a long time ago but still important, for other people but also for you. Emmanuel looks like communion every Sunday and the general feeling of love you receive in the community of the saints. Oh, and providence. God with us means God working for our good, but in a background within the laws of nature way. Providence is a word that magically turns miracles non-miraculous. So my church did teach that God was with you. God is everywhere, and everywhere includes with you. But as one of my favorite writers says, God is everywhere, but when he is everywhere, he tends to be nowhere. When Mamaw and Bobby and the baby died at Christmas, it felt like God was nowhere. But was he? Or was he there? Here? And I just didn't have eyes to see. It's late January, a year and a month after Mamaw's died. Bobby and I are waiting in the office at our elementary school for my papa to pick us up. We waited outside under the front awning like usual, but then all the other kids had been picked up and they moved us in here. We sit in side-by-side chairs. Our feet don't yet touch the floor. We try to be quiet. We pick at the border on the bulletin board behind us. We kick each other's chairs and dare the other one to make a sound. We count floor tiles. We whisper mimic the voices on the intercom. The secretaries keep looking our way and shaking their heads. He's an hour late. But then we see the van, gray with wood paneling, pulling into the car circle. We run out and hop in. Papa nods at whichever adult follows us out, but doesn't get out of the van. As we buckle our seatbelts, he pulls up and out of view. He stops when we're hidden from the office lady's scrutiny. "Jennifer, I need you to do something." I look over at my grandfather in the driver's seat. He's wearing silver-rimmed glasses, aviator style. He's balding, but not bald. His hair is white mixed with silver. His eyes are the color of the water in those pictures you see at far-off tropical destinations. Just a few years ago, he was a firefighter and a competitive weightlifter. These days, he golfs. He's been golfing today. He's still wearing his Jack Nicklaus polo and khaki pants. His shirt is soaked with sweat. He says, "Come on over here, darling. Sit in my lap. I need you to drive us home." First, I think he's joking. Then I think maybe it's a game. Bobby volunteers from the back seat. "I can do it." But Papa has locked eyes with me. He's trying to say something without saying it out loud. He's serious. Everything is not okay. You steer and I'll work the pedals, okay? I climb into his lap and follow his instructions. First, we're going to turn left, wait until all the cars are gone in both directions. I drive us home. I negotiate a roundabout, stop and wait at a light, then 3 left turns each across 2 lanes of traffic, all fearfully and wonderfully made. I've just turned 9. At home, Papa gets into the bathtub. He tells me to knock on the bathroom door every 5 minutes. He says he doesn't feel well, needs me to check in on him. I sit at the dining room table, deputized. I don't have a snack. I don't read a book. I simply stare at the grandfather clock at the far end of the room so as not to miss a knock. I have the sense everything depends on my knock. Bobby plays outside. When my dad gets home from work, he notices me watching the clock. I tell him about driving home and about checking on Papa. Dad barges into the bathroom, even though I tell him we still have 3 minutes, and finds Papa practically passed out. Papa agrees to an urgent care visit. Dad drives. Mom meets us there. Papa on a stretcher. He says to Mom, "I'm okay, darling." He flirts with the nurse. He smiles as they wheel him out and lift him into the ambulance. Mom chases the ambulance in our car. The hospital. The next day, we gather at the dining room table for a family meeting. Mom explains what a heart attack is. She says Papa needs surgery. She says if he makes it through the surgery, he'll have to stop smoking and stop eating so many sausage biscuits, but that if he does, he'll live. If he does. If he lives. Life is an if. I am too small for this kind of conditionality. I need heavy assurances, anchors, so I don't float away. I'm too small for this conversation, too small for this truth, and too small for my giant mahogany dining chair. I look across the table and see my brother. Bobby is smaller. Does anyone notice how small we are? Less than 2 years ago, we left our house and our dog and our river. We left to be with Mamaw, and then Mamaw died. And when Mamaw died, we moved in here to Papa's house. I share a bedroom and a bed with my little brother. Our bedroom is Mamaw's dressing room. Her clothes are in our closet. Her wig is on our dresser. She's here, but not here in any way that matters. And now Papa might die. I say to my parents at the important meeting, I feel like anything could disappear at any moment. I can't find it. I've emptied every drawer in every room in the house. I've gone through my pockets. I've looked through the trash. It's not here. At the visitation, in lieu of a body, my parents put a few of Bobby's things on the casket. A jersey from his college social club, a shell necklace he never took off, and his ring. It was silver, wide, with a wave and a surfer. Justin and I bought it for him at a market in Mexico on our honeymoon. He never took it off. After the funeral, I'm given 2 items Bobby was wearing when he died, the ring and the plastic bracelet they'd had to cut off his wrist. I got the ring because I'd bought it for him. I got the bracelet because I had a matching one. We'd tried out for American Idol together back before Thanksgiving. We met in an arena parking lot at midnight to camp out and wait for a shot at an audition. When American Idol staff came around with bracelets, Bobby declared himself a winner. No need to try out. The bracelet itself was trophy enough. I put it in my Bible. It had his blood on it. It fell out a few weeks ago. I can't find it. I put the ring in my jewelry box, and now the ring is missing too. How could it be missing? Did someone sneak into the house and steal it? Did Justin hide it? Did it fall through a portal into another dimension? Did it ever exist at all? Did Bobby? I'm taking a poetry class. I go. We read One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. She loses her keys, her mother's watch, her person. She says the art of losing's not too hard to master. Tears stain my textbook. She's right. Losing is easy. So easy, you can't help but do it. And that's what makes it so hard. What about the art of keeping? How do I master that? I had this cat named Minerva. She was white and black, with a perfect pink nose and the prettiest yellow eyes. I found her in the garage one day, abandoned by her mom. I spent an hour trying to catch her and 2 weeks trying to tame her. I took her picture on a pile of National Geographic magazines. She couldn't have been bigger than an apple. For months, Minerva lived in our house and ate cat food and played with toys made of cotton and feather and bells. She did not let my husband touch her, but she'd climb into my lap every so often and purr while I petted her pretty white neck. On occasion, she'd rub her face against my face. I thought she loved me. One day, Minerva ran out into the yard through an open door. She'd been an inside cat for so long, but being outside stirred something primal in her. She loved it, came alive, and from then on, she wanted to be outdoors. She'd hear the door creak ever so slightly and run from 2 bedrooms away to sneak out. Eventually, we let her spend more and more time outdoors. Soon, she was leaving for days at a time. When she'd come back, she'd be less and less eager to be held, more skittish, more destructive. I can't remember the last time I got to hold her because I wasn't thinking at the time that it would be the last. It was sometime after her first birthday. We'd thrown her a party, a quinceañera, because 1 cat year equals 15 human years, and because Minerva was becoming a woman. We dressed her up in a tutu and tiara. She endured it with a pinch of grace and much contempt. Minerva ran away a day or 2 after the party, and we didn't see her again. I assumed she'd been killed by a neighborhood fox. Other cats had. We held a memorial for her and made a photo album with pictures of her time with our family. That was 2 years ago. Last week, leaving the house, driving to dinner, my daughter Eve and I left our neighborhood a different way than we usually do. As we climbed a hill on this less familiar street, a black and white cat bolted in front of us. She was fast, graceful, striking, and I couldn't help but think I'd seen Minerva. I stopped the car, got out, and watched her, searching for some marking to prove to me this wasn't my surely dead cat. But there was the spot of gray on the extra long tail. I called, "Minerva?" And her head turned, and she took a step toward me. I sat down. She drew closer, creeping like the wild, nervous predator she'd always been and now was in full. Just 2 feet away, she stopped and stared. I stared back at what was not a ghost. I reached out to touch her, and just as my hand met her soft and familiar fur, she jumped and ran. I got back in the car and cried all the way to dinner. I am aware that my brother did not choose to leave me, but I can't help feeling like he did. Like there was something wrong with me. Like my presence was a burden or a tax. I am afraid that one day I'll run into Bobby on the street. And no, he didn't die. He left. I lost him. It's my fault he's gone. If only I'd... In his novel, Les Miserables, Victor Hugo writes, "The supreme happiness of life consists in the conviction that one is loved. Loved for one's own sake. Let us say rather, loved in spite of one's self." Online, you'll find these words tacked onto the front of Hugo's. Love is knowing that even when you are alone, you will never be lonely again. Hugo didn't write that. It's a misattribution, but I like it anyway. I said to my husband the other day, I've never felt loved like I felt loved by my brother. He cocked his head as he listened. He knows I love him. He knows how much he loves me. We aren't talking about mass or depth or quality. I said, with you, there's always our beginning. The way we came together, it was performative. I acted a certain way to get you to notice me, and then we dated for 5.5 years, and if I wasn't the girlfriend you wanted, you could leave. So I tried my best to be an awesome girlfriend. There were always other girls lined up, waiting just in case I wasn't enough. Even now, I feel a responsibility to be a certain kind of wife, the kind of wife you deserve. He softened. That's not... No, of course, I know you love me exactly as I am, but that's not how it started. So sometimes it's hard to believe that's how it is. That's why I shave my legs before bed. He smiles. Sympathy. With Bobby, I never had to earn anything. He loved me immediately and unconditionally. I was a mess, and he loved me. I was mean, and he loved me. I talked too much, and he loved me. He never made me feel like I was too much, or like I didn't belong, or like I didn't measure up. My brother knew me better than anybody, and in spite of that, he loved me, and I think he liked me. Bobby was born premature. Too premature. The doctors told my dad that my mom might die delivering him. But she lived. Would Bobby? He spent weeks in NICU, but then finally he came home. My parents stopped by my grandmother's house and she took 100 pictures. Bobby's naked in most of them. He looks like a frog, big eyes, scrawny limbs, like he's not quite finished becoming a human baby. I'm in most of the pictures, and in practically all of them, I have my eyes locked on my brother. In one, my mom holds us both, me in her right arm, Bobby in her left. I lean across her body to kiss the baby. He is already my baby. You can tell. I've claimed him. I'm 15 months old and already in love. Look through the albums and you'll see, as toddlers, as kids, as teens, Bobby and Jenny, Jenny and Bobby. Inseparable. Why did he love me? Love doesn't need a why. He loved me because he always had. No reason needed, nothing to earn, nothing to lose. And then he died. My supreme happiness, gone. And suddenly being alone did mean being lonely. A month or so after Bobby died, my parents called and asked if I'd go with them to New York City. Mom had always wanted to go to New York City. She and Dad both had time off work, and they were hoping to find some distraction that might keep their minds off the breath-robbing pain. Lying in bed all day crying was wearing on them. Plus, New York had the added bonus of our not knowing anyone there and Bobby's never having been. We wanted to be alone and distracted and not looked at with pity. So we went to New York and stayed in Times Square and stood on top of the Empire State Building looking for perspective. I took pictures on black and white film. Our first night in the city, we checked into our room and fell on the beds, exhausted. Just getting there had taken every ounce of energy we had. But then we looked out the window and saw flakes falling, easy to see against the black steel of the closest building. I put on my coat and convinced my dad to come with me, and we stood in front of our hotel looking at snow like only people from Florida look at snow. We bought tickets to a play from the TKTS booth because a Broadway play seemed like what you do in New York City. We picked Les Mis because I recognized it. My memories from the play are blurry and episodic. Uncomfortable seats, a revolving set, and crying. Les Mis, it turns out, is a play about dying. Every major character dies, almost dies, holds someone while they die, or sings about dying. Of the people who die in Les Mis, all of them are too young. Toward the play's end, exhausted from weeping and unable to stop, I watched the young man Marius holding a dying Eponine, just a 15-year-old girl, and I hear my dad who's never seen a play like this before, my dad who drives a truck and hunts and fishes and doesn't cry in public. I hear him 2 seats down, wailing like a wounded animal. We are blindsided by this play about dying. Death is taunting us, like Achilles dragging the lifeless body of Hector around Troy, Hector's whole family forced to watch. The psalmist wrote, "A horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save." Similarly, a trip to New York City. After the play, standing outside the theater, all of us exhausted, eyes red and puffy, I apologize for suggesting the absolute worst play for the moment. My dad laughs. He says, like dads do in 2002, "I kept waiting for those gay guys next to me to give me a hug." This trip to New York is the first trip I have ever taken with my parents without my brother. And at every turn, his absence haunts. We can't be the 3 of us without missing the 4th. This sad trip to this cold place is the first in what will be an entire future of Bobby-less vacations. Never again will my brother and I run off to explore or wander while my parents sleep in. Never again will Bobby whine from the back seat or fall asleep in my space or complain about the boring art thing I want to do. The feeling I get watching my parents walk together while I walk alone is new and terrible. In this family, I am missing my pair. Years ago, I read a book about a husband watching his wife die. He hasn't been the best husband, but that makes the grief even harder. He realizes as he watches her grow smaller and slower, her life ebbing away, that she isn't the only one waning. He reflects part of his self belonged to her, and so would travel with her. Abandoned. That was the word. He was being left behind by Margaret, and also by himself, the man she had created out of her love. That's what it felt like when Bobby died. Like I'd lost us both. My daughter, London, is practically grown now. But when she was a toddler, she lived with a set of invisible creatures, friends who listened to her talk and ran alongside the car and played games with her in the backyard. It's not right to call them invisible because to her, they were as visible as the grass and the car. But I couldn't see them. So to me, they were invisible and therefore imaginary. To her, material reality. But then she got older and she noticed that other people didn't see what she could see, and she started to wonder if what she'd always thought was real was maybe not real. Eventually, she stopped playing with the friends other people couldn't see. One day, she couldn't see them herself. What is real? How do we measure realness? Is it real if we can see it, touch it? What about feel it? Do others need to feel it too? There's something about grief that blurs the lines between real and unreal. It's like a drug or a third drink. Suddenly, the world you thought you knew looks different, less substantive, more fragile. It's like life was a cement block, certain, fixed. And then one day you woke up to realize it had been a Jenga tower all along, the whole thing undone by a single shift. There's this line from the novel, The Girl on the Train. The narrator, struggling to understand the basic realities of her life, says, "I have lost control over everything, even the places in my head." There's nothing as disorienting as discovering that the things you believed to be real aren't real, or aren't real anymore. 9-year-old Jennifer at the dining room table, 21-year-old Jennifer at the play, felt like she'd been turned upside down and shaken, everything falling out of her pockets. She'd lost things, places, people, seen them disappear like puddles under the hot Florida sun. Was there anything that couldn't disappear? There's this story in the Christian scriptures about two sisters who lose their brother. That's what we say when people die, "I'm sorry for your loss," as if it's a little bit your fault for not keeping track. Anyway, the story goes like this. Martha's brother, Lazarus, dies. He'd been sick, but she never thought he'd die. Too much was going on. Their friend Jesus, he'd started this movement. He started working wonders, legit miracles, doing things no one had ever seen, things like what Moses used to do, turning what was wrong right. He'd been teaching like someone with authority, like a king, like Solomon, but wiser, like David. Yes, like David, like he had God's heart, like he'd seen the Father's face. Jesus was around a lot these days, and when he was around, everything seemed enchanted. What could go wrong with Jesus close by? So Martha sent for Jesus when Lazarus got sick, obviously. But Jesus didn't come, and that's how Lazarus dies. But then, 4 days after she and her sister Mary have buried their brother, Jesus shows up. And though Martha is mad, furious really, she still runs to him when he comes. She can't help it. It's like a magnet, like gravity. So she runs to him, and when she sees him, she erupts. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." It's the truest thing she knows to say. It's Martha's confession. If you had been here. Jesus doesn't correct her. It's Martha's story I remember when I get the call about Bobby, because when Jesus shows up in her town, when he sees her tears and hears her confession, he returns to her what she lost. Lazarus will rise from the grave. Everything lost is found, gained, because Jesus is here. But what about me? It's been 7,382 days since we placed Bobby in the tomb. Where's Jesus? Why celebrate Emmanuel if God with us doesn't mean God with me? We don't have roads like these in Florida, roads that wind, disappearing behind rock faces, reappearing only to disappear again. We take a turn and find ourselves canyoned, squished between slices of towering layer cake. We take another turn and everything to the left falls away. We can see for miles and miles, tree-covered hills painted every shade of green. The road in front of us unspools like a dropped ball of yarn. Bobby presses against the glass on my side of the car, his whole body flung over mine without a second thought. Ooh. When the view shifts to his side of the car, I do the same. Ah. Mom drives with her left foot out the open window. It makes me nervous, but Bobby thinks it's great. He sticks his foot out the window too. Cool mountain air musses my dirty blonde bangs. Bobby closes his eyes and smiles. Dad sleeps in the passenger seat with the camcorder in his lap. Mom is teaching us to sing harmony. I'm further along than Bobby. I can pick out an alto part in most songs. Bobby is learning tenor, but he's tentative, still reaching back for the safety of soprano, the lead part, the part that makes sense alone. Today he's relaxed, enjoying the chill in the air, the sunshine streaming through the windows, and the freedom of being with people who like you even when you get things wrong. So he sings, his voice wandering up and down, looking for a part that's not my part or Mom's part, something new and his alone, something that fits. And then he finds it. And our voices settle in together like family voices do, emulsifying. He looks at me with wide eyes, afraid to stop singing and lose what he's found, but eager to celebrate this magic we've made. I smile as I sing, eyebrows raised, head nodding. He holds his part for a whole verse and then another. Dad wakes up and jumps in. He is not a singer, but he sings something akin to bass, and we laugh, and our laughter and our song spill out the windows and into the valley. And what did we sing in the car on the family road trip? A 17th century hymn about dying and the longed-for presence of God. Bobby sang, and Mom sang, and Dad sang, and I sang, "Abide with me." Fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens. Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. Maybe now is the time to tell you that 5-year-old Jennifer and 9-year-old Jennifer and 13-year-old Jennifer and 21-year-old Jennifer, they were serious about this God stuff. The hymns, the stories from Scripture, church, daily obedience, all of it. That girl singing in this car, she knows these lyrics. She understands them. And when she asks God to abide with her, she means it. She wants it. She wants it on this perfect day when God feels so close, the sunshine on her face like atomized glory. And she will want it later when the sun hides behind the clouds. So there we are, the Mays family, driving through the mountains, singing "Abide with Me" and meaning it. We ask God to stay with us when the sun sets. We ask Him to stay with us when our helpers leave. We ask Him to stay when it's our time to go. The invitation is sent. Will God answer? Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of The Happiest, Saddest People. New chapters release every Tuesday. If you're enjoying the story, would you please leave a review? It'll help people find the podcast, and it'll be a gift to me to know God's blessing you. If you're interested in behind-the-scenes info about The Happiest, Saddest People, family pictures, commentary from my kids, book recommendations, playlists, prayers, and a community of people who are all trying to understand the story God's writing in their lives, follow along at happiestsaddest.substack.com. The Happiest, Saddest People is a production of Hazefire Studios. Sound design by John Rhodes and Justin Gerhardt. Manuscript editing by Justin Gerhardt and Allison Justice. Writing and narration by me, J.L. Gerhardt. To be continued.